Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. I'm filming this Weekly Reads on Thursday, June 18th, and I'm planning on uploading this video Friday morning, June 19th. If in the look ahead part of this video I say tomorrow instead of today, I mean Friday, not Saturday. This reading week has been really spectacular, certainly compared to last week, which I did not film. I will talk a bit about my reading week last week, but before I do, part of the reason why I did not make a Weekly Reads video last week and why I haven't been making many videos the past week is because last week I suffered a number of mental health issues, and that affected a lot of things. I'm doing somewhat better now, although there was an incident earlier this week as well. So I'm going to start with this week's reading, and then I will talk about last week's reading, and then I will talk about what I'll be reading this coming reading week. And then I might, if I have enough time, talk about some videos I would like to make, even though saying that probably means I won't be making those videos because I never do, even though I really want to. Anyway, let's get started. So I started this reading week with At Swim, Two Boys by Jamie O'Neill. This is a novel set in early 20th century Ireland. It's set in southern suburbs of Dublin, and it's about two young men, Jim Mack and Doyle Doyle. The boys, the young men, are from a working class, or in Jim's case, maybe lower middle class background. When the novel opens in 1915, Jim is a scholarship student at the Presentation College in Glasgow and is contemplating a religious vocation under the influence of one of the brothers who has taken Jim under his wing. It's at this point that Doyle returns to town after spending several years living with his mother's relations in County Clare. Over the course of the novel, Jim and Doyle renew their friendship, and this friendship deepens and becomes romantic in the shadow of rising nationalist politics in Ireland, culminating in the Easter Rising of 1916. At Swim, Two Boys is amazing. I love this novel. It blew me away. How Jim and Doyle reconnect and how their friendship metamorphoses into romantic attraction, and the culmination of this story it was amazing. I also really liked how Jim's character develops over the course of the novel. He very much starts off as something of an empty glass, being filled up by the various influences in his life, starting with Brother Polycarp, who wishes for him to join the order, and then with his father, who wants him to continue on with their shop, and Doyle, who has his own wishes for what Jim will become in the future. And then ultimately, it's with an older gay man, Anthony McMurrow, who teaches Jim the history of homosexuality and gives him a frame of reference for him to latch on to, that Jim really comes into his own and really by the end of the novel becomes a force of nature, and it is just wonderfully well done. Also, I really love the development, the growth of Jim's father, Mr. Mack, who just, his final scene in the novel, his final thought, it's brilliant. So this is a great novel. I initially had some worry because the boys' story is largely finished with an act of love, of dedication. But then there is the Easter Rising. And during the Rising, I wasn't entirely sure I quite bought Jim's actions, because at this time period, nationalist politics were sort of becoming more on the forefront, and both Jim and Doyler kind of get swept up in nationalist politics. Also, Mr. Mack, much against his will, because I'm not entirely sure Mr. Mack actually knew what the hell was going on half the time. But I wasn't entirely sure if I quite bought Jim's sort of politicization, radicalization of what exactly he was up to. Although I think he had a certain idea that blows up in his face, but does lead him to like a really powerful moment, and it is just brilliant. I really love this novel. Just love it. Let's put you up. So, I read At Swim Two Boys Friday through Monday and had a blast. On Tuesday, I read Lion by Sonya Walger. This is a novel about Sonya Walger and her relationship with her father, who is in some ways the most interesting man in the world, and in other ways he is a shit father and a rogue, a con artist. The novel begins with her father fleeing Zaire after some con and meeting Sonia's mother in Madrid. They become a couple, they marry, they have Sonya, and the couple, they break up. Her parents divorce. And Sonia's father goes on to several other wives and other relationships, and gradually Sonia's contact with him becomes increasingly sporadic. And this novel really focuses on the traumas that ensue from having the kind of father that she did. And it is really well done. It's a tiny novel, and I think that sort of makes it difficult to maybe get some depth or detail. But what we get is really well done, and I really actually quite enjoyed Lion. So, yeah. Then on Wednesday, I reread Closer by Dennis Cooper. This is the first novel in the George Miles cycle of novels. Now, if you're familiar with, like, say, the work of Edouard Louis, you would think that the George Miles cycle would be autofiction. They are not. The George Miles cycle is inspired by a real person who Dennis Cooper was friends with as a teenager, and in later life they had a brief relationship. The real George seems to have had some mental issues, and some of the versions of George, the incarnations of George in the George Miles novels, have similar issues. In Closer, the incarnation of George Miles is a high school student who is very dissociated from the world around him. He is inordinately passive and is a drug addict. The novel is, barring 2 chapters from George's perspective, mostly told from the perspective of the men who love George and, except for the final chapter, largely leave him after they've gotten what they want out of him. And it's powerful, it's disturbing, as all of Dennis Cooper's work is. Dennis Cooper specializes in extreme kinks and violence, and his work can be quite hard to take. But I enjoyed this reread. And then today I read The Summer Boy by Philippe Besson, translated from the French by Sam Taylor. So The Summer Boy, much like Lie With Me, is autofictional. It is the story of a summer vacation Philippe took with his family in 1985 when he was 18, and tells of a last halcyon weeks before the realities of adulthood force itself on him and his friends. So, over the course of the novel, so every year, Philippe and his family traveled to an island off the coast of France for summer vacation, because a local butcher on the island was friends with Philippe's father during military service. So every summer, the Bessons would travel to this island for several weeks for summer vacation. So Philippe is a summer boy, a tourist. On the island, Philippe's best friend is the son of the butcher, Francois. Francois's best friend is a young man named Christophe. Recently, another young man has moved to the island and has been befriended by Francois, and this young man is named Nicholas. So Philippe, Francois, Nicholas, and Christophe form a quartet. At the beginning of the novel, they also meet brother and sister, Mark and Alice. Francois develops an attraction to Alice, and Mark and Philippe have a brief relationship. But the bulk of the novel is ultimately about the disappearance of Nicholas and how this disappearance transforms the other 5 going forward. I really enjoyed this novel. It, like I've said several times, Philippe Besson can write young gay love like nobody's business. And he captures the youth and the joy of youth that these 6 young people have brilliantly. And the devastation that comes from one of them disappearing. And the sort of hole that remains as there is no resolution because Nicholas was never found. So it's just brilliant and brutal, and I really enjoyed this novel quite a bit as well. So I had a fantastic reading week. Now, let's touch on last week. So my original plan for last week was to read The Line of Beauty by Hollinghurst and then move on to The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. Unfortunately, I started to have some mental health issues, and this plan ended up being abandoned. So, last Monday, while my mom was at a doctor's appointment, I thought to read Lion by Sarah Walger. That did not work out. And certainly, I think my mental state at the time really was responsible for a lot of what happened, because reading this on Tuesday, I really enjoyed it. So, yeah. So what I ended up reading from Tuesday through Thursday was I reread bits of, or most of, Two Houses, Two Kingdoms by Catherine Hanley. This is a 2-century look at the contentious relationship between the Capetian dynasty of France and the Norman and Plantagenet dynasties of England. The conflict between the two is rooted in the fact that William the Conqueror was also Duke of Normandy. And while his immediate successors to both the duchy and to England were separate, his elder son Robert held Normandy, and William II was King of England. However, with William's successor, his youngest brother Henry, he also conquered Normandy. So this trouble sort of reared its head. So at this time, while the Kingdom of England was largely unified, that the King of England controlled pretty much the whole body of England. That wasn't true for the French king. The French king only controlled Paris and the Ile-de-France, the region around Paris. The rest of the Kingdom of France was composed of semi-independent duchies and counties that, while owing fealty to the French king, largely were free to do their own thing, which also included going to war with the French king very often. So there was a bone of contention between the the Capetians and the Normans, because the kings of England were also dukes of Normandy, who owed fealty to the French king. And then things became even more complicated with Henry II, who, because through his father, inherited Anjou and Maine, which were two duchies or counties immediately south of Normandy. And then with his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, brought in Aquitaine to his possessions. And then his third son, Geoffrey's marriage to Constance of Brittany, brought in Brittany. So, very quickly, the western half of France was owned by the English king. And so, for much of this history, the various French kings were trying to solidify their control of their kingdom by reducing the independence of their most powerful vassals, most notably the King of England. And of course, the King of England did not want that. So this history is very much about the wars between the two over 2 centuries. Even though, of course, this conflict goes on to another 150, 175 years after the end of this book. So I read most of this book and rather enjoyed it, although by the point that I got to Henry III's reign, I started to lose interest. I really wanted to go and start reading As Swim Two Birds. And so, while Two Houses, Two Kingdoms was a nice sort of like, I enjoyed what I reread of it, but I don't think it's definitely not an indication that history is making a comeback. Certainly anytime soon. Given this reading week, I think I'm very, very much ensconced in fiction, poetry, and drama. So, on to this coming reading week. So, today, I will be reading Kingfisher by Rozie Kelly. What I have been doing the last few days is pretty much trying to read all day during the work week. And it's worked very well. I really enjoyed cutting down on my time on my tablet. I really enjoyed just sitting down and reading these books. So I'm hoping I'll be able to get to Kingfisher, all of Kingfisher tomorrow. And then over the weekend and into next work week, I'm hoping to again return to The Line of Beauty by Alan Hollinghurst. And then once I finish that, I will then get back to The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. And then next weekly reads, I will probably talk a bit about the last books that I will be reading in June. Even though I seriously suspect that I'm not going to be able to completely finish my reading plan. Because next weekend I do want to read Jane Eyre for June Eyre. And I don't know necessarily if I will have enough time to also get to 11-inch Open Heaven and Night of the Iguana. I will figure that out, and if I need to move them to other reading events or find some other time to read them. But that's a subject for later. Anyway, on to some video making plans that or some videos I want to make next week. So, I've been wanting to make a writing video ever since Steve Donahue announced his latest attempt at replacing NaNoWriMo, June writes. But that hasn't really worked out. I don't know if it's necessarily because what I wanted to talk about I've worked out on my own, although I still think it probably would be, I should still talk about it on camera. I also want to respond to and give my take on the 100 greatest novels lists from The Guardian. And I think those are the main videos I want to make next week. And hopefully I'll be able to make them. But we shall see. Anyway, BookTube, I'm going to sign off for now. So until I see you on Monday with a weird book haul, have a great rest of your day and definitely have a great weekend.